There is a brutal truth about human nature that most people learn too late. People rarely value what they can access whenever they want. The moment you become endlessly available, endlessly agreeable, endlessly willing to give your time, attention, energy, forgiveness, and loyalty away for free, something changes. Not necessarily in what people say, but in how they treat you. Your presence becomes ordinary, your attention becomes expected, your kindness becomes an obligation, and eventually, the very things you once gave freely begin to feel worthless in the eyes of those receiving them. This is the hidden psychology of value. The world does not always reward generosity. Sometimes it teaches people to exploit it. You can give someone your time every day, and they may still complain when you are unavailable for 1 hour. You can answer every message instantly. And the one time you take longer to respond, they ask what is wrong. You can always be there for someone, and the moment you need them, they suddenly become busy. Why? Because human beings often measure value through difficulty of access. What is rare feels important. What is limited feels precious. What is constantly available becomes part of the background, and the background is rarely respected. This does not mean you should become cruel. It does not mean you should manipulate everyone around you. It means you must understand a dangerous principle. If you make yourself too easy to access, people will eventually stop appreciating the privilege of having access to you. The person who is always available has no leverage. The person who constantly explains has no mystery. The person who desperately seeks approval has already surrendered power. And the person who gives everything away before anyone has earned it teaches others a terrible lesson. You can receive everything from me without becoming anything valuable to me. This is where your transformation begins. You must stop asking, how can I make people like me? And begin asking, what am I giving away that should have been earned? Because respect is rarely created by demanding it. Respect is created by establishing a price for your presence, not a financial price, a psychological one. Your time has a price, your attention has a price. Your trust has a price. Your loyalty has a price. Your emotional energy has a price. And the price is not money. The price is character, consistency, reciprocity, respect, discipline. If someone wants access to your world, they should not receive it simply because they ask. They should receive it because they have demonstrated that they can handle it. This is the difference between being generous and being available to everyone. The generous person gives from strength. The desperate person gives from fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of being disliked, fear of being forgotten, fear that if they stop giving, people will stop staying. But here is the paradox. The more terrified you are of losing people, the more power you give them over you. And the more power you give them, the less they have to value you. The person who is terrified of being replaced behaves as though they are already replaceable. They over-explain, they overgive, they tolerate disrespect. They accept crumbs and call them loyalty. They allow people to disappear and return whenever they please. They become emotionally available to people who are emotionally unavailable to them, and then they wonder why they are not respected. But respect does not come from how much you are willing to suffer. Respect comes from the boundaries you are willing to enforce. The world studies what you tolerate. Every time someone disrespects you and you continue giving them the same access, you teach them that disrespect has no consequences. Every time someone ignores your value and you chase them, you teach them that your attention can be obtained through neglect. Every time someone treats you as an option and you continue treating them as a priority, you create an imbalance. An imbalance creates contempt. This is why the first law of becoming valuable is simple. Stop offering premium access to people. Pay nothing. Your time should not be available to everyone. Your secrets should not be available to everyone. Your emotional depth should not be available to everyone. Your loyalty should not be available to everyone. There must be levels. The world should not be able to walk directly into the deepest parts of your mind. People should have to earn access. Not because you are arrogant, because your inner world is valuable. A palace does not allow every stranger to walk into the private chambers. A powerful institution does not hand its secrets to every visitor. A valuable person should not give their deepest trust to someone who has only demonstrated temporary interest. You do not need to become cold. You need to become selective. There is a difference. Coldness says, I need nobody. Strength says, I can value people without becoming dependent on their approval. This distinction changes everything, because when you no longer need someone to stay, you become capable of choosing whether they deserve to stay. And choice is power. Desperation removes choice. The desperate person asks, what must I do so they don't leave? The powerful person asks, what have they done to deserve continued access to me? One person negotiates against themselves. The other evaluates. One person begs for a position. The other decides whether the position should remain available. And people can feel this difference. They may not be able to explain it, but they feel it. They feel when your attention is desperate. They feel when your kindness is a transaction. They feel when your confidence depends on their reaction. And they feel when your presence comes from choice rather than need. That is why the second law is never let your desire for connection destroy your value. The more you want someone, the more dangerous it becomes to show them that they are your entire world, because when someone realizes they are your only source of validation, they gain enormous power over your emotional state. Your mood depends on their messages. Your confidence depends on their approval. Your peace depends on their attention. You are no longer relating to them, you are orbiting them. And anyone who becomes the center of your emotional universe eventually gains the ability to control your weather. They can make your day with a message. They can destroy your night with silence. They can reward you with attention. They can punish you with distance. And the worst part is this: you begin cooperating with your own control. You start checking, waiting, wandering, interpreting, chasing, explaining. You give someone the power to disturb your mind without even being present. This is not love. This is psychological dependence. And dependence makes you cheap, not because you are actually worthless, but because you have handed someone the ability to access your value without earning it. The cure is not to stop caring. The cure is to build a life so full of purpose that no individual can become your entire emotional economy, your work, your mission, your health, your skills, your friendships, your solitude, your ambition. These are not distractions from life. They are the foundation of your power. The person who has nothing to do but wait for someone else's attention is easy to control. The person who is building something larger than their immediate emotions is difficult to manipulate. This is why absence is powerful, not fake absence, not childish games, real absence. The absence created by having a life, the absence created by being focused, the absence created by not interrupting your purpose every time someone sends you a notification. When you are busy becoming someone, you naturally become less available to everyone, and that scarcity creates a different perception. People begin to understand that your time is not infinite, your attention is not automatic, your presence is not guaranteed, and when something is no longer guaranteed, it becomes noticeable. This brings us to the third law. Make your absence felt without announcing it. Never tell people, "You will miss me when I'm gone." That is insecurity disguised as confidence. Simply go. Stop appearing where you are not valued. Stop participating in conversations where your presence is tolerated but not appreciated. Stop forcing yourself into rooms that only remember you when they need something. Do not make an announcement. Do not write a paragraph. Do not demand recognition for your departure. The most powerful withdrawal is often silent. When you remove your energy, people discover how much of the atmosphere you were creating. When you stop initiating, you discover who was actually interested. When you stop solving everyone's problems, you discover who only loved your usefulness. When you stop explaining yourself, you discover who respected you and who depended on your explanations to control the conversation. Silence is a test, not a test you announce, a natural experiment. You simply stop carrying the relationship alone, and then you watch who reaches, who notices, who complains, who disappears. The answers reveal more than words ever could, but be careful. The goal is not to disappear so people will chase you. That is still dependence. The goal is to become so grounded in your own life that whether they chase you or not, you remain stable. That is the difference between strategic distance and emotional manipulation. The moment you withdraw only to provoke a reaction, you are still controlled by the reaction. True power is when you withdraw because your standards require it, not because you hope someone will beg. The fourth law is even more uncomfortable. Stop rewarding bad behavior with your attention. Attention is one of the most valuable currencies in human psychology, and most people spend it recklessly. They give attention to insults, attention to disrespect, attention to people who provoke them, attention to those who constantly create chaos. They say, "I hate drama," and then spend hours responding to it. They say, "I don't care what people think," and then write long explanations to prove it. They say, "I'm done with them," and continue discussing them for months. You must understand something. Your reaction is a reward. When someone provokes you and you react emotionally, they have received something from you: your attention, your energy, your focus, your peace. You have paid them. This is why the calm person is so difficult to control. They do not reward every attack. They do not answer every accusation. They do not defend themselves against every misunderstanding. They understand that not every battle deserves their presence. Some people do not want the truth. They want access to your emotions. They want to pull you into their frame. They insult you and you explain. They accuse you and you defend. They withdraw and you chase. They provoke and you react. Now they control the rhythm. The person who can control your emotions can often control your behavior. And the person who can control your behavior can influence your decisions. This is why emotional discipline creates value. You become expensive when people cannot purchase your reaction with a cheap provocation. A stranger's opinion should not have the same access to your nervous system as someone who has earned your trust. A random insult should not receive the same attention as meaningful criticism. A temporary misunderstanding should not receive the same emotional investment as a genuine betrayal. Everything must have a price, and not everyone can afford your attention. The fifth law: let people experience the consequences of losing access to you. One of the biggest mistakes people make is continuing to provide benefits after someone has violated the relationship relationship, they remain available, they continue helping, they continue responding, they continue offering emotional support, they say, I forgive them. But forgiveness without changed access is often just permission. Forgiveness does not require you to reopen the door. You can release resentment and still change the locks. You can wish someone well and still remove them from your inner circle. You can understand why someone hurt you and still decide they no longer deserve proximity. This is maturity, not revenge, not hatred, just consequences. If someone repeatedly disrespects your time, they receive less of it. If someone abuses your trust, they receive less information. If someone takes your loyalty for granted, they receive less access to it. If someone constantly creates chaos, they receive less proximity to your peace. The punishment is not your anger, the consequence is your absence. And this is where many people fail. They want to punish others while remaining emotionally connected to them. They want the person to suffer. They want an apology. They want recognition. They want the person to understand what they lost. But the moment you need someone to understand your value after losing you, you are still seeking their validation. The highest form of consequence is indifference, not fake indifference. Real emotional detachment, the moment their behavior no longer determines your mood, they have lost access to the most valuable part of you, your attention. The sixth law, do not explain your value to people committed to undervalue you. There are people who misunderstand you temporarily, and there are people who benefit from misunderstanding you. The difference is important. The first may be reached through communication. The second uses communication as an endless courtroom where you are always forced to defend your existence. You explain your intentions, they question them. You explain your boundaries, they challenge them. You explain your loyalty, they demand proof. You provide proof, they move the standard. Eventually, your entire life becomes a performance designed to convince someone that you deserve basic respect. This is where you must stop. Your value is not a court case. You do not need to present evidence to everyone. A diamond does not argue with someone who prefers stones. A rare book does not chase someone who cannot read. A powerful mind does not need to convince every person of its depth. Some people will not recognize your value because recognizing it would require them to change the way they treat you, and they do not want to change, so they minimize you. They criticize you. They reduce your achievements. They make your standards appear unreasonable. They call your boundaries arrogance. They call your confidence insecurity. They call your silence weakness. Why? Because if they convince you that you are asking for too much, they can continue giving you too little. Never negotiate your standards with people who benefit from your lack of them. You do not need to convince everyone. You need to become so clear about who you are that their confusion no longer becomes your emergency. The seventh law, generous, but never be cheap. There is a difference between giving freely and giving indiscriminately. A powerful person can be extremely generous, but their generosity has intention. They give because they choose to, not because they are terrified of rejection, not because they are buying affection, not because they are hoping someone will finally recognize them. When you give from abundance, giving increases your power. When you give from desperation, giving decreases it. The question is not, how much can I give? The question is, why am I giving? Are you giving because you genuinely want to, or because you are afraid that if you stop, they will leave? Are you helping because you have the strength to help, or because you need to feel needed? Are you forgiving because you have released resentment, or because you are afraid of being alone? The same action can come from strength or weakness. The difference is the motive. Never make your kindness so predictable that people can exploit it. A person who is always available becomes a resource. A person who gives selectively remains a person. This is why boundaries make kindness more valuable. If you never say no, your yes means nothing. If you never leave, your presence means nothing. If you never enforce consequences, your standards mean nothing. Scarcity creates meaning. A person who rarely gives praise makes praise valuable. A person who rarely makes promises meaningful. A person who rarely gives trust makes trust powerful. The world respects what it cannot casually obtain, and your life should not be an open marketplace where everyone can take whatever they want. The eighth law, become so valuable that your absence creates a problem. This is the ultimate form of value, not demanding to be needed. Becoming genuinely difficult to replace. Develop skills, develop judgment, develop emotional control, develop discipline, develop knowledge, develop character. Become the person who brings something rare into every environment. Do not simply seek attention. Become interesting. Do not demand respect. Become competent. Do not ask people to value your presence. Become useful in a way that cannot be easily replicated. But remember, usefulness alone is not enough. The most useful person in the room can still be exploited if they have no boundaries. Value is not simply what you can do for people. Value is also what you refuse to tolerate. Your power comes from both your contribution and your standards. The person who can build, create, solve, lead, and walk away is dangerous to underestimate because they are not trapped. They do not need one job, one relationship, one group, one source of approval. One opportunity, they have developed themselves. And self-development creates options. Create freedom. Freedom creates confidence. And confidence creates value. This is why the most important investment you can make is not in becoming more attractive to others. It is in becoming less dependent on their approval. The person who needs to be chosen is always always weaker than the person who can choose. The person who needs to be invited is always weaker than the person who can create their own room. The person who needs to be accepted is always weaker than the person who has accepted themselves. Your goal is not to become unreachable. Your goal is to become selective. There is a difference between being expensive and being impossible to access. An expensive person can still be reached, but access requires value in return. Respect, loyalty, character, effort, consistency. This is how you change the way people treat you, not by demanding that they see you differently, by changing what they are allowed to receive from you. If you are always available, become less available. If you always explain, become more comfortable with silence. If you always forgive without consequences, change the level of access. If you constantly chase, stop. If you keep giving to people who never reciprocate, withdraw your investment. If you are always trying to prove your value, stop presenting yourself to people who have already decided not to see it. You do not need to become cruel. You need to stop being cheap with the most valuable resources you possess. Your time, your attention, your energy, your trust, your presence. These are not infinite. And the moment you understand that, your life changes. You begin to notice how often you give people access before they have earned it. You begin to notice who only contacts you when they need something. You begin to notice who becomes uncomfortable when you develop boundaries. You begin to notice who respected you and who only respected what they could extract from you. And then you stop taking it personally. You simply adjust the price. Some people lose access. Some people move farther away. Some people complain. Let them. When you raise your standards, the people who benefited from your low standards will always accuse you of changing. They are correct. You have changed. You are no longer offering unlimited access to a limited life. You are no longer giving premium energy to people who offer minimum effort. You are no longer confusing attention with affection. You are no longer confusing availability with loyalty. You are no longer confusing being needed with being valued. And this is the final truth. You teach people how to treat you by what you continue to accept from them. If you accept being ignored, people learn that they can ignore you. If you accept disrespect, people learn that your boundaries are decorative. If you accept being used, people learn that your value is available without responsibility. But the moment you become willing to walk away, everything changes, not because everyone suddenly becomes better, but because you become harder to exploit. And that is the real transformation. You stop trying to convince people that you are valuable. You become so disciplined with your access that only people capable of recognizing value remain close enough to experience it. You stop asking, how do I make them respect me? And you begin asking, why do they still have access to me? That question will eliminate half the confusion in your life, because your value is not determined by how many people want you. It is determined by what you are willing to protect: your time, your mind, your peace, your standards, your future. So do not be free. Do not make your attention endlessly available. Do not make your loyalty automatic. Do not make your presence guaranteed. Do not give everyone the privilege of knowing the deepest parts of you. Be generous but be selective. Be kind but be difficult to exploit. Be available but never desperate. Be powerful enough to give and disciplined enough to withdraw, because the world does not always respect what is freely given. Sometimes the only way to make people understand your value is to stop allowing them to have it for free. Become rare, become disciplined, become expensive, and let your absence teach the lesson your presence never could.